Hey everyone, Matt Sitter here, CEO of AFN. AFN, we believe, changes where opportunity happens, and the best way to find opportunity in change is a network that is diverse in experience, expertise, and perspective. When we do our events, the goal is to bring subject matter experts forward to help us expand our knowledge and also expand our networks. Today, Sarah Deane is with us. She is an AFN member and is here to talk to us about burnout. Sarah has been in the technology business for quite some time, and user experience and data is a lot of where her experience has come from. And she's founded two companies. A lot of what we're going to be talking about today is around her company, MEvolution. But really excited to talk to you, Sarah. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm good.
All
Glad
right.
to be here.
Excellent. So this idea of burnout and human energy, we're gonna have this continuum of conversation that we talk about. How did you actually end up getting into this idea of human energy to begin with?
Well, it wasn't planned, I can tell you that much. So previously I'd started out in AI, and that was my master's and my classical training. And I stayed there for a bit, and I love data and algorithms. And then I decided that I also like psychology and human behavior. So that took me to my experience work. And the majority of that work was done in employee experience at HP back in the day. So my playground was really big. It was 320,000 plus employees. And I got to travel around the world and study humans. But what I realized was that measurements really sucked. And we spent a lot of time measuring things. And so that was where I wanted to kind of apply my skill set. And what I'd done was create a way to measure any goal in a way where the measurement itself gave you the roadmap. And so what that means is you focus on measuring and creating the ecosystem in which the goal will most naturally occur. And that's what I'd done at my first company. And it was while I was at my first company that someone had come to us and said, hey, you know what, stress is rising, health and well-being solutions are rising, but both numbers are rising. So if the numbers of solutions are rising and the very outcome you're hoping to influence is still rising, we're missing something, right? Can you figure out some measurement? And that was 2017 when we started the journey. And what we set out to answer was what's needed to perform and feel your best throughout the day. That was what we were going to model for. And it took us about a year of collecting data sources. And then the model revealed 74 attributes. And over the next 2 years, collecting data around those 74 attributes and working with clients, that was when we kind of discovered this blueprint. And essentially what it said was, look, how you manage your human energy is at the very crux of whether you are surviving, maintaining, or thriving. And this blueprint is a print of behaviors that either give you energy or detract energy. And from that moment on, we built out the rest of the system, and then we became MEvolution at the end of 2021.
Nice. Okay, so you said number of solutions were going up, number of the depletion of energy was going up at the same time. So what were we missing within that?
Well, we were missing exactly that. We ended up with a plethora of solutions that kind of worked in areas, right? Or they worked at like the superficial level. And it wasn't deep enough to really change how you were responding on a daily basis, like how you were thinking, how you were responding on a daily basis, which was contributing to the stress or the overwhelm and things like that, right? So take many organizations, they're like, oh my gosh, we have burnout, let's give everyone, a day off. It's great, the day off's needed, but very quickly burnout is back again because we actually haven't changed the response system for people.
Okay. All right. So when we're thinking about burnout at organizations, it seems like this is a hot topic right now. With organizations that are out there, folks that you're talking to, how are things going in that area right now?
Well, it's pretty bad.
Okay.
Over half of the workforce is actively in burnout, so experiencing high levels of burnout with frequency. And that's a lot of your workforce not showing up at full capacity, right? And the other thing is that those that aren't burnt out, there's this whole section of people that are doing okay. But like doing okay is not their most progressing, their most flourishing, their most thriving self. And what can happen with doing okay is as things hit them, it can really rock the boat. So when you're in a thriving state, you have an abundance of energy to have resilience, to feel good, to perform well, no matter what's happening around you. And so that's the issue we're in. It's like not everyone's totally depleted, no, but a lot of people just are kind of maintaining, right?
Okay, that's that surviving. mode that you
It's
were
yeah,
talking about.
you're well, surviving's like you're really depleted. It's just like treading water.
Okay.
Maintaining is what we call energy neutral. That's like maintaining
Okay.
can feel good, right? It's status quo, but the problem is you're not your most resilient. And with crisis after crisis hitting, that can then end up pushing you back down the scale into depletion. So you're kind of at risk, if you know what I mean, even though it can feel okay, right?
And so as we're talking about this, maybe it'd be useful to have a baseline definition of burnout. So how would you say you define burnout, and is that different than how other people are defining it out there?
Well, burnout's kind of a state of being, right? It's a state of feeling depleted as if you have very little energy to give to anything. So it essentially is directly linked to how much energy you have. So I don't think I describe it that much different, but the contributors to burnout can be very different for people. And I think that's where we see the differentiation happening, which is why some of these solutions that have a broad brush don't necessarily fix the issue. Because the issue isn't that we don't know what to do. That's why I always tell people, like, you can Google search how to get rid of burnout, all the instructions are there. The issue is that you have to influence how people respond on a daily basis, how they're thinking and how they're responding on a daily basis at scale. And that's what we weren't doing, right? So as you scale solutions to an organization of employees, the depth in which those solutions work generally declines, because with scalability, it becomes more generalized. And therefore, we're losing that personalization that helps the person understand how they're responding.
When someone's feeling burnt out, what are some of the emotions that they're feeling, or what are some of the behaviors that you end up seeing from them?
So I feel a little bit like you can't be bothered with much. It's like you're doing stuff, like you're going through the motions. Nothing's really that exciting. Some people tend to become a little bit more isolated, like because they don't have the energy to really be around people or like give to things. It feels very unmotivated. It's kind of like you're just going through the motions, right? Now, some people, when they're really bad, also have physical signs, headaches, different pains, stomach aches, things like that, right? Headaches is pretty common. But yeah, it's just that feeling of the helplessness, hopelessness, like just like, and it kind of ranges from there.
So it can present in a ton of different ways. There's not any one way that is a universal sign that you could recognize it.
It's kind of that list, right? Do you have any physical health signs, like constant headaches? Are you having trouble sleeping? Are you not feeling like hanging around people? Are you kind of feeling like you're going through the motions? Like, yes, you're getting things done, but is the cost of that, like you're not feeling engaged with what you're doing? Like, how often are you feeling positive emotions versus negative emotions, or just bleh, right?
Okay, so we know generally what it is. We know what it feels like. How do you get there? How do you end up in burnout to begin with?
Well, there's a couple, like I said, the blueprint to human energy is pretty vast, right? And the real causes of burnout often aren't on any organizational dashboards, because it can come down to a plethora of things. Like, yes, you can have too much on your plate, right? Too much to do, too much to give energy to. But the reality is the reason you're burnt out goes below that. It's why do you have so much on your plate? Are you struggling to set boundaries? Are you struggling to say no to things? Do you have people-pleasing tendencies? Like, what's your decision-making process and how you distribute your energy? Then maybe you just aren't that enthused about what you're doing. Lack of connection can end up in a burnt-out state, right? If you don't feel like your daily efforts are contributing to something of meaning, you can end up in a burnt-out state as well. And then your mental processes. Like, if you're spending a lot of time on worrying thoughts, concerning thoughts, that can also drain your energy. You can end up feeling super fatigued at the end of the day just because of so much energy is being wasted in these thoughts, right? So you end up getting there because you're not optimizing your energy expenditure, but it can come from all of these different areas.
Have you seen any sort of information on how this relates to the ability to actually get promoted or excel within your job? Like, if someone's feeling burnt out, what impact does this have on their individual careers?
It depends whether it's noticeable. We have some very high functioning burnout people, right? That are slaying all their goals, getting everything done, but the cost is high. And what often happens with those people is eventually it catches up. You always have to pay the piper somewhere, right? Eventually you end up either losing that talent or something happens health-wise to them. So you want to catch it earlier than that, right? If they're very high functioning, they're getting stuff done on the outside, it can look one way. I kind of went off track there. What was the question?
Well, I'm actually interested in where you kind of push that to, because leaders can be very much under the impression that things are good and they're not.
Yeah. So
Right.
actually, and the question was related to the French. Let me come back there too, because there is some current research on that.
Yeah.
But Deloitte came out with their measurement recently. It was a really robust study, and it found that the leadership gap is actually massive on two areas. One is that leadership, like 90-something% of C-suite, think that their employees think that they are making the right decisions for their well-being. And it's something like only 50-something% of employees actually believe that to be the case. And there's about a 25% gap between where C-suite say their employees' well-being is versus where employees actually say their well-being is. And the reason that's important is because every decision you make as a leader is therefore slightly flawed, because you're making your choices and your strategic plans based on an understanding of your employees' capacity that's not true, right? So you are setting forward these plans and saying, like, this is what we're going to do as a company based on thinking that your employees have more capacity than they actually have. So it's well within your interest to get a very accurate reading on how your employees are actually doing and not how you think they're doing.
Right. Okay, so we think that we've got all this extra capacity and we think we can be more productive than we can, but there's the burnout that's there. How, and maybe to build off of this just a little bit further, for CEOs or for individuals within the organization, how good are they at assessing that they're in a burnt out state?
It depends. Some people have higher levels of self-awareness, right? But part of that's education. Not everyone actually understands that these things are contributing to burnout. They understand how they feel, but they don't necessarily realize that that's put them in a burnout state, right? So you can ask someone how they're feeling and they might be able to tell you, no, it's really busy, I'm really tired. So they'll be able to comment to things. Things are really busy right now, I have so much on. And then you have to look at like the life of an employee, right? Because lots of things fuel burnout. So take employees that are parents and looking after elderly parents on top of their job, right? So you've got to look at the span of their life, because no employee wakes up in the morning and then says, let me change out my brain and start work. Like there's no transition in work and life, right? So they're not getting a whole new brain fresh with capacity, and vice versa.
Right. Have you watched the Apple TV show? Oh, what is it called? It's like their brain has no memory of what's inside work versus what's outside of work.
No, I haven't. But wouldn't that be like how much?
You should definitely check it out.
That'll be my next video.
I'll think of the name of it. I'll think of the name of it. So okay. So we said, hey, the feelings of burnout are generally going up. We've got solutions out there that haven't worked. How's the pandemic impacted how much burnout people are feeling?
Well, it's definitely impacted, right? But there's a couple of things to consider there. We weren't on a good track before. Like Gallup's been measuring engagement and negative emotions for a long time, and it's been upticking for well over a decade. So we weren't good before the pandemic. The pandemic came along and made everything worse, right? And also shone massive lights on it, exacerbated the whole situation, right? But what happened is people felt like, oh, we're getting out of pandemic and it's back to normal, right? But just because we can go to restaurants again and hop on a plane, it's not back to normal. What happened is your employees have ended up in, and yourselves as leaders, we're in energy deficit. We kept pulling from energy for a long time to get through it, and we've ended up in deficit. And it's not just, oh, we can suddenly get back to everything as normal, because what are we doing in that? We're operating from a fundamentally different place. It's exactly like a bank. We went into overdraft and pandemic kept going. And then we kept going into our overdraft. And then the debt collectors have come and we're still trying to act as if we have these flourishing accounts. But it's not true.
Right. Well, okay. So, we've been depleted even further. When you think about how people interact with one another, is burnout contagious in some way? If someone's exhibiting these signs, does it make it more likely for the people around them to actually start to exhibit them as well?
So what's interesting is obviously energy is contagious, right?
Okay.
You know it, that you know those people that you're around, that they really lift you up. And then you also know the energy vampires. You don't even have to necessarily see them, just think of them and you immediately feel like that sense of earth, right?
I call them fun sponges.
There you go. That's probably nicer than energy vampires. But so energy is contagious, but also attitudes and emotions are contagious. And that's on the flip side too. So they actually found that if you are within the vicinity, I think it was 25 feet of a high performer, someone that's motivated, like actual motivation, which is not something you can see. It's a very underlying feeling, right? Performance went up by 15%. But if you were in 25 feet of someone that wasn't, like someone that was unmotivated and lower performing, performance decreases by 30%. So it's like double on the negative side. So the more positive energizers you have in your organization, actually performance does increase. And Harvard researchers came out last year saying that the energy effect was the #1 predictor for leadership and business success. But almost no organizations are harnessing it because they found the link to almost everything. It was a factor of 4 or more for profitability and performance.
So we could say that negative energy or the burnout is equally contagious, but with a greater impact.
Yeah, exactly. Like if you've got a lot of demotivated people around you that are depleted, you're suddenly going to start feeling depleted yourself for 2 reasons. 1, it's contagious. But 2, if you are someone that's highly motivated, your energy is getting like kind of absorbed, kind of carry everyone else along as well. Right. So it's another area of depletion for you.
So this isn't necessarily universal within companies as well. You could have pockets of high energy and pockets of low energy.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Well.
And that's really important when you're looking at your organization, is to look at those subcultures that exist. There's differences within potentially your teams, geographic locations. There's also differences in gender, your diverse employee populations. Like there's a lot of differences. Some segments have been impacted differently, right? The gap is wider for them.
So in terms of thinking about what we do about it, I would want to divide this up into 2 buckets. So we know that CEOs have to be worried about their companies and what's going on with them. They also got to worry about themselves and how they are actually making sure that they take care of them. The likelihood is that if they have a perception gap of the people that are around them, they may have a perception gap on themselves and may not be taking care of themselves in the way that they need to. Maybe if we start with the employee population, how can a leader make sure that they are cognizant of what's going on, and how can they actually, put some fuel back in the tank?
So when you want to strategically work on burnout, it's actually a 2-pronged approach. If you're currently in the state of burnout or very close to at risk, it's different because you lack capacity. So your first action has to be regain capacity. So it's a short-term plan to give yourself the breathing space and to give your brain back some capacity to actually work with. And then it's about creating sustainable, renewable human energy. Well, that's a longer term approach, right? That's actually identifying the sources of the burnout, those underlying root causes, and then a plan to address those. So the strategy is the same, whether you're looking individually or you're looking at your organization. And then there's 3 components to your strategy, right? 1 is, where is energy being wasted? Let's stop wasting energy. So where is it being wasted? For myself? Am I doing things that I don't need to be doing, right? Are there thoughts that aren't serving me? Like futile thoughts, right? Why am I pondering something for 3 hours? Is it serving me? But it's the same as an organization. So where are you wasting energy as an organization, right? Are you wasting effort? Are they aligned to not aligned to something? Where's the pockets of waste? Because you can convert that, right?
What's an example of that?
It could be that you have a highly inefficient process for a group that you have, where a simple action could take out half an hour, for example, right? Meeting culture, massive one organizationally. Right? The amount of people that waste energy on pointless meetings, right? So that from an organization.
I mean, I was just thinking of the thing that you talked about earlier, making sure that butts are in seats. Someone's going around actually checking them out. I'm sure that is not energy accretive.
No, and back to the office has fueled various elements of burnout for people as well, right? So it is an important strategy to consider as well, how you're doing that. So yes, the first part of your strategy is, how do I eliminate energy waste? The second part is, how do I increase energy? So individually, that's actually how do you get your fuel? So exercise, food, like all the basics that we know, but there's some other stuff too, like making time for the things that actually energize you personally, whether that is, painting, whatever, right? Listening to music, whatever it is, watching shows, whatever, right? Whatever it is that energizes you, making space for that. And it doesn't have to be big. We all have this minimal set of needs that we need to protect. So actually energizing yourself. And then the third thing that your strategy has to include is how you optimize the energy you already have. So I describe it like a car. Essentially, if you're driving a car and you want to be very efficient and effective in how much mileage you get out of your car, if you have a fuel leak, well, that's not going to serve you well, is it? Right. So you have to plug up the leak. If you don't gas up or put petrol in, as I say, you're not going to get very far either. Right. And then if you have a car with no leaks and you have a full tank of petrol, and I have a car with no leaks and a full tank of petrol, I might get more miles than you because of the way in which I drive. Right.
I did perfect. On the second point, how well do you think people understand ways to refuel themselves? Are they self-aware on that? Do they need to actually spend some deliberate effort thinking about how they do that?
I think a lot of people are aware of the standards, right? Which is the standards are the things that we get raised knowing, like eat well, move your body, and get sleep. But the reality is there's a bunch more positive energy sources that can help you out in times where those things might not be as good. I'm sure many CEOs probably don't get as much sleep as they would like, right? But there's a bunch of other positive energy sources, things like being in nature, laughing, hanging around with other positive energizers, being grateful, like all these just other things that fill up your tank that you have to make space for. The part where the awareness is important is understanding your minimal set. We all have a minimal set of things that keep our energy bank generally okay. And this is a very minimal set of things. So one of my minimal set of things is that I don't read any emails for the first 10 minutes from the time my eyes open. The first 10 minutes is no emails, no messages, no nothing. The reason being is I normally am like saying to myself, okay, these are the 3 things I have to get done that day. I do some like just grounding myself, right? The moment you see a message, your mind starts working. And you are not at your fullest capacity. So my first 10 minutes of clarity is reserved. And that I don't even care. Like the world needs to be imploding before I give that up, right? So it's what's your minimal set of needs. I have some other minimal needs and then I protect them. Unless there's some real reason to move it, I protect them. And they can be very minimal. It could be like one dinner a night with, your husband, your wife, it could be, whatever it is really. Take a run for 30 minutes a day. But that minimal set, just make sure that you are energizing yourself with some level of frequency.
Okay, so people actually probably need this list to understand for themselves. Hey, this is what I got to do to refuel.
Yeah. And it's trial and error, right? I have people that they work on like understanding, we call it your minimal viable energy ratio, just like an MVP for product, right? It's what's this minimal most value. And they're like, well, I used to really enjoy reading. I'm gonna institute that. And then after 2 weeks, they're like, the reading hasn't done anything for me. It's like, yeah, just take some trial and error. Figure out actually, hey, I done this week and my general week was better. Okay, that's probably in your minimal set, right?
So leaders, they're responsible for the environment within an organization. So hopefully they're thinking a lot about the environmental stuff, like, all right, meeting culture, things like that, trying to remove those energy depleters that are out there. How much do you think they ought to feel responsible for being that positive person and driving up the energy around them? Because I can see that being great for some people and not so great for others.
I mean, you definitely don't want a leader turning up that's totally depleted, right? Because energy is contagious. That will go like wildfire, right? But there's 2 parts to that. One is if you want to be a positive energizer, it actually comes down to a list of behaviors and mental processes. Then you'll naturally be a positive energizer. It's not work when you're naturally positively energized, right? Second of all, if there's a moment when you're like, oh, I really feel this way, but I've got to show up and be all like rah rah because I don't want my team to feel like totally depleted, that happens. But the 2 things that most leaders miss is, one, you have to make it a really conscious choice. You have to actually know, hey, like I feel crappy, but I'm going to turn up like this. Because what that does is stop your brain going into conflict with itself. It's like, well, this isn't true. Conflict, right? So just having that acknowledgement actually reduces energy waste. And then after you've done it, you've pulled out more from the bank, right? Anytime you're showing up not authentic to how you're really feeling, even if there's a good reason to, you drain more energy from your energy bank. So straight afterwards, spend 10 to 15 minutes re-energizing so that the next thing you do, you're still performing at your best. You will not be performing at your best if you go straight from that into your next thing.
Okay. There's demand for leaders to be vulnerable and transparent around things, but still, it sounds like still there's times where you got to figure out, hey, I can show up, but you've got to make sure that you're actually recharging the tank yourself afterwards, something that gives you a little bit of boost.
Exactly. Because what you're doing is every time your brain needs energy to do everything, right? Energy is essentially your currency. And so every time you're using it, you're showing up a little bit less at peak performance, a little bit less at peak anything, right? So you want to get into the swing of maintaining your energy and topping it back up so that you're always showing up as best as you can, right? And it's the same with your employees, right? They're using it, and they're not topping it up.
One of the things that I've heard you mention before, and I think it's really interesting when you're in this depleted state, that you're actually pushing decisions to a binary set instead of looking at all the options that are out there. Can you talk to us just a little bit about that?
Yeah. So anytime that you are overwhelmed, stressed, depleted, which is a state of burnout, that's depletion, right? Your brain is built to conserve energy as much, because it's so expensive to run as an organ. It's built to conserve energy. So it goes, oh my gosh, I don't have much energy. Let me start conserving. And it pulls back and it tries to be really fast to protect you. But what that does is we end up trying to make fast decisions and we go, it's this or it's that. And it's very rarely the case that it's this or this, that. But if you pull back and give your brain a little bit of space, you'll start seeing some more options. That's why people get, ideas in the shower or whatever, right? Your brain can start doing its work, joining dots.
Yeah.
Right. And that's what happens. And it happens on several strategic choices. And I'm like, 60 seconds. You don't need to wait a long time. 60 seconds. Give yourself some breathing room and let's just look in the middle. Like if you find yourself ever thinking this or that, stop for a second and say, let me just write down one more option. Just one more. And you'll start.
That's an awesome signal. Yeah, that's a great signal. It's like, okay, maybe I'm not exactly where I need to be. And I think that you made a really interesting point when you think about just the biology of people. The brains take up an unbelievable amount of energy from folks, and even like you hear about chess masters using up 6,000 calories during a match, right? They're not physically moving around or anything like that, but it's their brain using all that.
Correct. And I think that's so a lot of people don't actually realize that, right? Is that, and it's shocking to me sometimes because I feel like we should be teaching this even at schools. Like once you teach someone how their brain's actually working, they make phenomenally different choices, right? Because they have an understanding and they can work with their brain's processes as opposed to against it. We spend so much time working against our brain's processes because we just don't understand it. And the reality is that ends up in one of those states. We're just not making good choices, right? We're not making.
Well, I do think kids are learning more about this, like the ideas of self-care and things like that. And just like, hey, how am I making sure that I recharge?
Definitely.
Particularly adolescents are just very vulnerable around thinking that they've got to be doing absolutely everything. So getting some of those behaviors in place could be the right time. The human energy pledge, this is something that I think it came out a few weeks ago. Can you describe what the human energy pledge is and what your hope is that it accomplishes?
Yes. So basically, understanding energy management and actually cultivating the behaviors for it is incredibly powerful. Me, myself, I practice it, and obviously we help organizations with it. And so this year, our focus is on raising awareness about it and helping equip as many people as possible with the skills. And so the energy pledge, we're working with organizations that care about energizing their employees. They can get involved. There's different options to get involved, basically. But everything that we do through the pledge, 10% is going to 503c funded wellbeing programs for at-risk youth and underserved communities, because they have even less access to stuff like this. Right. And so our mission is to energize the world one soul at a time. And so that's just a way that we can give back and bring together leaders that really do care about energizing their employees, energizing themselves, energizing their business, and then also energizing those that need it the most.
Awesome. So maybe before we go into questions, what's the one thing that you think leaders ought to be thinking about more than anything else around how they can actually be providing more energy into the organization?
Well, that is the question, right? Where's your strategic plan to create renewable, sustainable human energy for your organization? Like if you want you're asking your organizations of a lot, whether you're going through transformations, whether you're going through transitions, whether there's layoffs, back to the office, You're saying, hey, we need all of this from you to achieve X, Y, Z. We've got numbers to meet. We've got new innovation. We want to stay competitive. So you're asking for them all of this. A lot of them are already in deficit. So where are you balancing back again? How are you actually supporting them to have the energy needed to achieve that, right? So on your strategic plans for 2024, or whenever your year starts, where is your line items around human energy, right? Because if you don't have one, you're just going to carry on going into this state of depletion, right? And I think that's really important. And then can I squeeze in another one there? Because I think it's also very fundamental. It's that the leadership playbook has changed, and so has the management playbook. We are now dealing with a workforce where at least half of them are burnt out. A lot of them are in high levels of stress. It's something like 84%. I need to check back their experience with frequency, high levels of stress. There's a height of anxiety. Back before, we didn't really learn, like, how do you manage and lead employees in that state? Because it changes everything. The way you communicate, the way you show up, the way you create your strategic plans. We're dealing with a fundamentally different workforce. So I really urge you to also think about how you're equipping your managers and the rest of your leaders in how to actually manage humans that are in this state, because it's very different. You have to talk very differently. The same sentence you would have delivered news with X years ago will now stimulate even more of those feelings of anxiety. So, like, how do you actually communicate, right? The skills are really important.
Well, and I think if we want to kick this up in terms of importance that leaders ought to be thinking about, you're actually talking about, hey, leaders got to be marshaling resources. Sometimes that's money, sometimes that's talent, and you're saying, hey, the energy is actually a resource that they've got to marshal and actually be thinking about how they're putting together.
Correct. Because if you don't, we're just going to stay on there, right? You're not going to be achieved. All these big goals everyone wants, it always makes so we want highly engaged employees, high performing employees. We care about wellness, all this. Well, yeah, but their energy directly influences all of that. It is probably the most important human asset you have, is your organizational energy, right? Your human capacity.
All right, well said. Thanks a ton, Sarah.